Hello, I'm Jenya DeLima. Welcome to Writing and Editing, the author-focused podcast that takes a whole-person approach to everything related to both writing and editing. Creativity is influenced by our other interests, our observations, and our life experiences. This can shape the language we use and how we use it, and sometimes that may make the wording itself feel as if it is alive and moving. Rebe Huntman's writing has been described in just such a way, and I'm pleased to have her on today to talk about the connection between culture, movement, and memoir. Well, first, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jenya. What a beautiful introduction. I love it.
Oh, thank you. So, I know that dance is a major part of your life, and I'd like to have you start by sharing a little bit about how that creative medium has impacted your writing.
Yeah, so I was a professional Latin dancer and choreographer for a number of years and had a world dance studio and world dance company that operated outside of Chicago. And even before that, as a child, I played piano. So
Hmm.
I feel like music and musicality. My mother was an operatic singer. Her father was a musician who played every instrument in the orchestra. So, and my father on the other side was a self-taught jitterbug dancer
Oh,
extraordinaire.
fun.
So I feel like all of these different, streams of rhythm and musicality have really shaped and influenced my life.
Yes.
When it comes to dance, particularly so, because it was Latin dance that led me to writing my recent memoir, My Mother in Havana, a memoir of magic and miracle. And that book came about in large part because of dance, because it was my career as a dancer and choreographer that first took me to Cuba 20 years ago
Hmm.
and introduced me to the dances in the Afro-Cuban traditions like Santeria that are more than just, I'd been trained to think about dance as being performative and something
Oh,
you master. And, we've got mirrors in the studio. You always want to make sure everything is perfect and
yes.
right. In terms of spectacle and showmanship, and what I encountered in Cuba was that these dances that I was performing and teaching, these Latin dances had their origins in dances that are designed to summon the gods and bring the gods to earth to dance with us and communicate with us and communicate through us. And, that was a real turning point in my career as a dancer and my time here as a human being in terms of
Yeah.
really seeing how spiritual our movements are, our dances are, everything that we do can be seen, if one is
Mhm.
so inclined, as an invitation to communicate with other people, obviously, but with other realms, right? With the spirit
Right.
world. It's a really powerful act when we put something on the page or, we dance a step. So there's a real physicality for me in language that's reminiscent of dance. Yeah, so thank you for that question.
Yeah. So my mom was a dance teacher. So I also grew up dancing from the time I was 2 years old and just thinking about all the famous ballets and how we use that as a way of storytelling, just the same way we use language as storytelling. And I like that you said we learn that it's performative with the mirrors in the studio because you are looking at muscle extension and movement and is your skeleton aligned properly? How straight is your spine during certain ballet steps and that sort of thing? And yeah, you can so easily see how that translates into language, but not just those styles of dances, but the others you were talking about, where we're not looking at performative now so much as a way of communication or a way of inspiring or bringing about action.
Yeah. We're talking about both writing and movement. And,
Mhm.
especially today, in these times, but always I'm thinking about what is it that I'm putting out in the world, right? What words am I choosing? What things am I writing about? Because there's a real power in that. There's a real power in saying, hey, world, here's something I find interesting, important, beautiful. Will you notice it alongside me? And I think it's where we as humans have, incredible power and agency. And, maybe some of the listeners aren't writers or dancers, but in every single action we put out into the world, right? It's a
Mhm.
creative act and an offering.
Yes, and I know some of the reviewers have said that your writing feels very poetic or lyrical, and that also feels like movement because we hear sometimes people saying, well, how can a flat word on a page be musical or lyrical? But all you have to do is think about just even iambic pentameter or something where you almost automatically can feel like that wave going up and down and up and down. It doesn't just feel like words, you feel that movement and just the way the syllables move you along or the stress beats.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of a lot of poets. I think poetry is one of the most beautiful and potent forms of expression. And one of my favorite poems is Annie Finch, and she's such a fan of meter and rhyme,
Mhm.
which we've lost in our modern age. We've kind of lost that. It's like it's not cool, but it's actually a chanting, right? It's a form of
Yes.
chanting and an invocation, and it gets back to that, more spiritual nature of what we're doing, right?
Mhm. I never thought about it like that, but it is, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, where as you start reading in some sort of meter, you just feel it kind of lilting along with everything you say, and you almost change what you were going to say so it still fits that pre-established meter that you've now become accustomed to for whatever reason.
Yeah, perfect.
And I think again, like dance is the same way. And so yeah. But so besides how dance has impacted it, did it impact not just how you wrote, but also what you wrote about?
Yes. I've written my whole life, but I dedicated several decades to really primarily focusing on dance. And when that dance career ended, I was really bereft and there was a
Oh,
grieving process and
yes.
and so I wrote a lot about dance. I also did this crazy thing where crazy.
Let's go with fun.
Let's go fun. I took my dance costumes, which were really fabulous. And, one of the things as I retired from dance was, well, who am I without these costumes? Who
Oh,
am I if I'm not the woman on stage who's performing? Again, it gets back to that performative thing.
mm-hmm.
I took my dance costumes all around Chicago, which is where I was living at the time, and I would drape them over tombstones or I would take them into dressing rooms and, prop them up as if they were like a person.
Oh,
Um, and so I had this whole series of photographs that I took of the empty dress. And the question I was sorting through at that time was, who am I without the dress? Who's the dress without the woman?
mm,
What is this thing
oh, how
called
beautiful.
woman? Which then is a question that really showed up around the same time in my writing. I would say two things have really profoundly impacted me as an artist and as a human. And one is my career in dance, but the other is that I lost my mother when I was 19.
Mhm.
And it was such a huge loss. I think everyone listening, it's inescapable. We all came into this world with a mother,
Yes.
right? And regardless of what kind of relationship we have with our mother, which can be very different, some of us have, absentee relationships with our mothers. Some are very close. Some of us have lost our mothers. Some of our mothers get on our nerves, right? We have all kinds of relationships with our mother, but it's such a central relationship. And when I lost my mother at 19, I felt very adrift, and conventional wisdom told me just to keep moving and make
Mhm.
something of myself and kind of put the memory of my mother behind me. And all that caught up eventually. I followed that advice, very diligently. But, when I was about to turn 50, about the same time I was carting around those empty dance dresses and photographing them and wondering about this question of like, who am I, right? Who am I without this outer shell of performance and of these beautiful dresses. And I was really missing my mother. And it's just now that we're talking about the two things at once, I'm realizing how related they were because I
Oh,
was aching for a mother that I barely remembered anymore. She'd been gone for 30 years. I couldn't have picked her voice out of a lineup, but I ached for her. And I think I was aching for someone to show me the way. I think my whole life I thought, by the time you turn 50, you know who you are. You feel your sense of power in the world, and you move through the world purposefully, and you never question yourself. And that was what I thought 50 would feel like. And then it felt so different. And I found myself really questioning, all right, I'm looking for this role model. Where do I find it? I'm looking to connect with my mother. Where do I find it? And because of my career in dance, because of those years I had spent traveling to Cuba, working with
Mm-hmm.
choreographers there, I knew a couple things about Cuba. I knew one, they have a real sense of who the mother is, what the mother is.
Mm-hmm.
They have some very strong spiritual mothers as really powerful role models, unlike the role models I found in my own country. They also have, these spiritual traditions that really keep the door open between the living and the dead. And so my background in dance took me once again to Cuba to look for answers to these unanswerable questions I was asking. One, if my mother's been gone for 30 years and I miss her so much, I ache for her, but I don't really remember her, then
Right.
what is it that I'm missing? What is this thing called mother? And where does one go to find that and connect with that in a meaningful way? I felt in my own country, I was surrounded by role models, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pop icons and underwear models and porn stars
I
and
don't
soccer.
know.
And, on and on and on, right? So many
Right.
different models for how to be a woman, but none of them felt like the kind of woman I wanted to be, right? I
Right.
was
Yes.
something much more powerful. So that was one of my questions is how do we connect with that sense of womanhood and motherhood? And also, how do I connect with my mother? I realized I'd done grief wrong. Wrong sounds really judgy. Wrong for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that served me to turn my back on her for so long. And I did it with all the right intentions of making myself, into something. But I went to Cuba where I knew, again, that the ideas about life and death and talking with the dead and keeping the dead close were very different. And so dance took me to Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Those things that I was experiencing took me to Cuba. And those were the seeds of my book, My Mother in Havana, a memoir of magic and miracle, which is about my search to connect with my mother in Cuba
Mm-hmm.
through those Afro-Cuban traditions that keep the dead close, through seances and pilgrimages, working with a spiritist in the small mountain town of El Cobre, joining tens of thousands of people in celebration of the mother, working with Santeria priests and priestesses through dance again and other forms to really communicate with the spirits. And it was just this really beautiful door that opened that ended up
Yeah.
leading to this book.
Yeah. And then, like you said, the word connection or reconnection. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that. Not just what reconnection means to you, but who and what you connected or reconnected with.
Ah, so it's interesting. I was talking about the book to a group of people recently, and there was a Cuban American man in the front seat who had read my book already before
Mm-hmm.
coming to the presentation. And I was going through a whole long-winded explanation of, that answer of what I connected with. And he raised his hand. He said, "You went to Cuba to find your mother, and you found yourself." And so that's
That's
the
the
short.
tagline right there. You just came up with marketing material.
I can't do, but I mean, I can explain more fully than that, but that's really that in a nutshell. And isn't that like what every good quest is? You
Yeah.
go off looking for something, you've got this deep, I like to use the word unanswerable question because I think that these really big questions that we can inch toward answers, but they're too big to ever really fully grasp are the most interesting ones, right? And
Mhm.
so I went to Cuba in this case looking to connect with the spirit of my mother. But what I ended up doing was connecting with a whole nother way of seeing the world and living in the world and communicating with really all that is. So, to demystify that a little bit, some of the spiritual traditions I was working with and invited to work with while I was in Cuba, the Afro-Cuban traditions like Santeria, that we have a very skewed, we get very little information about those religions here in the US, at least in my experience. And when we do, they're very skewed. So I don't think that we understand them properly. But there are these beautiful earth-based, religions where the idea is that we are all interconnected. There's one God named Olodumare who is so vast, we can't comprehend such vastness. And so that one God comes to us through all these intermediary gods who watch over us and guide us and show us the way. And we each have we have one Orisha in particular that's our guardian Orisha and that watches over us in particular and really shows us the way. So right there in terms of being connected, right?
Mhm.
Not just me out in the world, but me with my own guardian spirit. And in my case, it's Oshun, the river goddess, who's mighty and powerful and vast and comes to us in all these different guises. So she can be the flirtatious, young, beautiful dancer, or she can be the vulture that picks at the bones of the dead, and she can be a weaver, and she can be a diviner, can foretell the future, and she can do all of these things. So what a tremendous role model, right? To have the permission to move into all those different, guises and shapes. So that's one thing in terms of relationship, was a relationship with the spirit world, that again, these orishas or intermediary gods are so human-like in many ways. They're not perfect. They have their own struggles, and so they're highly relatable. The other thing in terms of relationship is the idea that we are related in a very vital and important way to everyone who's come before us and everyone who will come after us.
Mm.
So the idea of ancestor worship, when I think about my 19-year-old self who lost her mother and the guidance that I was given by a guidance counselor, keep moving, make your mother proud, by keep moving forward, don't really think about her. In Cuba, it's a very different idea. The idea is that we're linked in an ancestral chain and that those who came before us are still with us, and they're guiding us with their wisdom and they're whispering in our ear. So the idea that I could put my mother here with the wisdom that I received, put her memory aside so I could make something of myself, is
Mm.
completely contrary to the idea in Cuba, which is, how could you possibly move forward without bringing your mother with you? Because she's the one that's going to say, hey, this is the way, go this way, right? Watch out for that pothole over there.
What a different way of looking at it too. But I can see in that idea of that you're not alone, even when you might think you were before then, whether it's by seen or unseen, just being able to recognize that and to make that part of your worldview and how that has to be such a paradigm shift.
It's a huge paradigm shift, right? If we think about how many people, are in our lineage and all the people we have in our camp, if we choose to open that door that says, yes, my ancestors are with me, then I have a pretty powerful army of benefactors, right? Who are all on my side, that I can ask for things, that I can talk to. It creates an incredible depth in terms of, one's life experience. And I
Mm.
think it also really changes how you then view your life and your responsibility. So in these traditions, which are based in a Yoruba, West African worldview, it's that we have a responsibility. We have to earn our place as an ancestor. Like, it's no small thing to be an ancestor that's going to be whispering in future generations' ears. So you need to gain your own wisdom. You need to do your life right so that you can then be a good ancestor to those who come.
Yeah.
When we talk about relationship, it's just so beautiful, all the different ways that we're braided together. And the last thing I'll say, and this is, I think, it's not a blatant tenet of my mother in Havana, but it's very much in there, is the idea that as human beings, we have very complicated relationships when we look at them from a historical, in the moment, point of view. But if we
Mm.
go back generations and generations, we find ourselves with a single ancestor or a single mother.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're all related and all
Yeah.
family.
And it also pulls you out of the self a little bit and has that broader perspective of thinking about others or people who will come after, not just yourself in the moment and what you need and how you feel. And it's very forward thinking too. You're not just, again, there's like an extra layer of mindfulness to it, because I think mindfulness includes thinking again about those broader circles, not just the self.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yes, absolutely.
Well, so going back to a little bit to writing, how did you portray the development of this reconnection when you were bringing that across on the page?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting as writers, no one teaches you how to write a book. You kind of have to figure it out, yourself. And one of the things that I was really intent on figuring out and had a lot of fun figuring out was how would I bring all this to a reader who would fall into one of many camps, but broadly on one side, the book is called My Mother in Havana, a memoir of magic and miracle. And I knew setting out that some of my readers would be all about magic and miracle,
Mm,
right? Like I'm in, right? Those are words that resonate with me. And that there are others that are really allergic to that kind of language and that kind of thought. And I have many friends who fall in that camp. And so I wanted to write a book that would invite everybody to enter this world that was for me very different when I entered it. And so I didn't want to just come across as, hey, I found out all this stuff, here it is.
right.
So I think one of the beauties of writing a memoir is getting to relive through the writing all of my own questions, right? Starting out as someone who didn't feel connected,
Uh,
starting out as someone who felt really lonely and filled with grief and filled with questions that felt so vast and unanswerable. And then to remember that and put that on the page before you even start on a quest. Like, where is my beginning place so
yes.
that you'll remember it because you learn things and then sometimes you forget where you started out. So part of what I wanted to do was carry my reader on my shoulders as we kind
Mm,
of go through these different experiences and knock on different doors and be like, hey, is there anything valid in here? Is magic real? Is miracle real? Can we talk with the dead? Right? And so to just recreate each of those scenes in really vivid detail and allow myself to be vulnerable and questioning at every step.
mm,
Not the person who knows everything, but the person who is frightened as I go along and fearful and doubting and asking constantly, is this real? Right? Do
yes.
I, am I making this up or is this really happening? So
Well, have you ever gone back and done a different series of photographs of the dresses now that you've gone through these experiences?
oh, I love that you asked that. I haven't, but I've thought about those dresses recently. And it's funny because I actually got rid of the actual dresses after I did that series of
Um,
photographs. But that notion still really interests me because
mhm.
art can point at different things and different questions and photographs and visual art differently than writing because you don't have all the words. But just that image of the dress without the body in it, but where the dress is animated somehow. It interests
How do you think your styling of those photos would differ now than it did from when you
me.
first took them?
Wow. I think that I would feel more joyful about it.
Mhm.
I think there'd be more of a joy and a playfulness in it. There was so much grief when I first did it. And now I think I would like to just see those dresses kind of dance.
Yes.
Just the movement itself, the beauty of being in the world, however briefly, that we have this moment to flutter gracefully or fall to the ground or
I'm gonna go for
whatever.
flutter gracefully. That sounds like the the better of the two.
And everything in between, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, for the last question, just as something that hopefully is a little bit fun. If My Mother in Havana was a style of dance, what style would it be and why?
Mm. So thank you for that. I actually had the opportunity to do a playlist for Large Hearted Boy, and it has this song on it by these French singers. Their name is Ibegi, which means twins,
Hmm.
uh, Ruba, and the song is River. And it's a mix of African and Afro-Cuban beats, but it's a little more modern and it's very mysterious. And it calls you just like the river, calls you its invitation.
Oh,
And it's invitation to find yourself in the river, the river that's carries you, it flows into another river or another body of water, but it changes with every bend,
yes.
right? So this invitation to try oneself out as all different kinds of currents and movements.
Yeah, I love that, especially because we think of water as being life-giving and even just all the different civilizations and societies throughout time that have set up their encampment or their area where they're going to live along that body of water, but it reinforces that theme of connection and interconnection because that water is constantly moving to other bodies of water and through us and then through, again, going back to ancestors, those people who come from us years and years later.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you for this very lovely conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
It has. I've enjoyed it immensely. And then thank you for listening and be sure to check out the show notes for additional information, including all of Reeve's links. And then please join me next week when author Brenda Coffey will talk about reclaiming your narrative through memoir. Thanks again.